Hello and welcome to the Berkcast, the How to Train Dragon podcast. I'm your host, HC, and with me is...
Wolf.
And today is... And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of HC listened to someone say this and he decided to make an episode out of it. So, therefore, here we go. People say that great villains are the good guys of their own story. Seeing how to Train Your Dragon has a lot of villains, both movies and show, and I guess you can say comic books and everything, I decided, you know what? Let's look over all the villains or antagonists or just obstacles for Hiccup to overcome throughout the franchise and see if they are indeed the good guys of their own story. Um, so before we start though, Wolf, what is your point of view on this claim?
What do you mean? Like just that villains can be like that villains see themselves as the good guys, or that this works for How to
You
Train Your
know,
Dragon, or
no, because the basic not necessarily criticism, but point of view is that people that the best villains in any kind of story are the good guys of their own story. Like from their point of view, they are the heroes. They are the good guys and not the bad guys. What do you think about it? Do you agree with it, or can you bring up an example or
I,
something?
I would say it works in some instances, not all. I think there are some villains who you'll see that they're just not the good guy in any inherent way, not even like of their own story really, like they're just a terrible person. So it definitely can work in some instances, and I think How to Train Your Dragon definitely has some of those instances. Those bleh, has some of those instances where we had an obstacle or a villain who wasn't necessarily evil in and of themselves. They were doing what they thought was right. Like Stoic is a great example of someone who was doing what he thought was best and what he thought was right.
Yeah, but let's keep the How to Train Dragon talk until
Oh,
further in
sure,
the episodes
sure.
because
Um,
let's not jump the gun. But
Using an outside example, I can't think of one off the top of my head. Dang it.
well, maybe I'll go and you'll get something
Yeah, sure, go
soon
ahead.
enough. Okay, so I agree that great villain characters are indeed the good guys of their own story because the thing that sometimes make a villain what makes a villain so great is that you can see where he or she is coming from when like you listen to the motivation and you say, you know what, that's a good point. I don't and I would even argue that there are some villains I root for more than the hero in some cases sometimes. And but the point is, I understand where people are coming from, where when they say that if the villain's motivation is understandable, then it obviously creates a better villain character. But at the same time, look at the Joker, for example, one of the most well-loved villains of all time. I don't think he's the hero of his own story, unless you know what? No, there's no unless. That guy is just an asshole when you really think about it. Yeah, and to the people who point out to the Killing Joke, this is not a good guy of his own story. This is just a guy who had bad luck.
Eh.
The point is, I don't think the villain needs to be a good guy in his own eyes in order to be a great villain or a great character, but it helps. It helps. Now you heard the guy that was driving a motorcycle over here. He is just an asshole.
Yeah,
He's not a hero of anybody's story.
no. Agreed.
I don't know him, but I assume it.
I think we all agree.
Anyway, do you have an example to Why you agree or disagree with with the statement before we start delving into the How to Train Your Dragon baddies?
Without linking directly to How to Train Your Dragon, probably not right off the top of my head. I would say I would say I could see it going like both ways again, like I kind of said earlier. Like, you can see some villains who you can definitely sympathize with, and you can see where they're coming from and what they were trying to attain or do. Whether you agree with the method or not, is up for debate, but you can at least see where they were coming from and what they were trying to achieve. Where others, you can see that, no, this guy was just, or this guy or person or girl was just straight up an asshole. End of.
Mhm. Yep. Okay, so with that said, let's do what we do best. Talk about How to Train Your Dragon for an hour, maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So we have a list of villains or oppositions. So let's just go by the list I came up with then. So first off is Stoic. And yeah, we know Stoic is not the villain per se, but he is kind of an obstacle in the first movie that Hiccup needs to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the answer is pretty clear on it.
At the very
Stoic,
least, he's that obstacle given like a personified form, if you will.
yeah, pretty much. But yeah, I think we can all agree that Stoic is a good guy of his own story because, we talked about this a lot on the Berkcast before that there, like, because killing dragons and hating dragons, this is the way he was raised. This is the way everyone on Berk was raised. And this is what he knows. He knows that he has to keep his people safe from the dragons who steal food and burn down houses and stuff. So I think yeah, he is the good guy of his own story.
To give a bit of, I mean, yeah, like you just said, like right, like to him, the dragons are attacking his people. They're killing his people. They're like you said, there's burning down houses, destroying their homes, taking away their food. So yeah, like from his perspective, from his point of view, he can only see the terrible things the dragons are done. So his way to combat that is to kill them as well, to take them down before they take him and his village down. That's the way he sees to handle it because that looks like the only way he can approach it. That looks like the best option that he has.
Mhm.
So you can understand where he's coming from. You can sympathize with his decisions, at least in the regards of protecting the village that he's tasked with protecting. He is the chief. It's his job to protect them. So you can understand why he makes the decisions he makes. Whether you agree with them or not is a different story, but you can understand where he's coming from at the very least.
Well, to be honest, it's kind of hard not to agree when there are a bunch of creatures who attack you
Well,
for.
I mean, we as an audience, we see Hiccup's perspective as well. And the second we see Hiccup, learn about Toothless, we're like, well, Stoic, you're wrong. But at the same time, Stoic doesn't know what we know and what Hiccup knows. And there is a difference in that.
Yeah, but before Hiccup made him toothless, before
Oh, yeah,
any.
absolutely. Absolutely. You can definitely agree with him from that point.
And also, I can, even if we take the entire, even after Hiccup befriends Toothless and has that entire realization that everything they know about the dragons is wrong, I can still get, I can still get why Stoic wouldn't, when he disowns Hiccup, for example, when he has that little fight with Hiccup and he like immediately says, you're not a Viking, you're not my son. As much as it's painful and as much as I sympathize with Hiccup, I understand why he does this.
Mm-hmm.
I understand and I accept the motivation behind this. And you can also see that it's hard for, I mentioned that plenty of times probably, but you can see that it hurts him to disown Hiccup at that point, but he
Mm-hmm.
does it. He does it for the sake of his village. He does it for the sake of his people. It's a sacrifice he must make to say to as a chief.
One could argue at that point it's not, though, and that he's not really doing it for the sake of the village or his people. Like, disowning Hiccup doesn't protect the village. Disowning Hiccup doesn't exactly save the village in some major way, right? Like, it's a sacrifice for him, sure, but it's a sacrifice that he it's not really a sacrifice. It's just him very much in him very much in his own anger, choosing to do that.
Hmm.
So you could
Well,
argue that that decision is probably one of the few decisions that he makes that you can't as easily sympathize with or see where he's coming from, because he does it out of anger. Not so much, oh, well, if I don't disown him, he's going to go on to destroy the village with the dragons. Like, no, I don't think that was going to happen. Granted, Hiccup is definitely good at destroying the village himself as well, but, I don't think he's as much of a danger as the dragons are.
something I just thought about, kind of a what if scenario. Imagine if, everything in the movie happens until this point, and then Stoic and the other Berkians leave to the nest with Toothless, giving them directions. But let's assume Hiccup didn't get the other teens and assign them dragons. Let's assume he didn't do that. What would and the Berkians arrive at the nest. Let's assume they managed to beat the Red Dead by themselves, and then they head back to Berk. What does Twig do with Hiccup exactly?
I mean, if you kind of like follow, I know some people follow the idea of traditional Vikings to some degree, right? Like, oh, well, he'd probably be banished, right? He'd probably be outcasted from the tribe. And I think that's probably a good idea of what he might do. Then again, there's he could punish him, I suppose, maybe. But how would you do that? I
Well,
guess, I
in
guess,
Viking times, banishment is pretty much a
well,
punishment.
no, but if you
So
didn't want to banish your own son, he probably would lose the, like, he's no longer able to be chief at that point because he threw his lot into the dragons. You could probably also say, well, your friend is still alive. Here's your punishment. I'm going to kill your best friend right in front of you.
yikes. You know what? I think if that in that scenario, it it's becoming like, yeah, I can get how he sees himself as the hero of his own story, but at the same time, kill like,
It's much. It's very much.
yeah, it uh,
But it definitely, you know, sets a point, and it brings across his point very clearly, I would say,
yeah.
to Hiccup at
Okay,
that
yeah.
point.
Yeah, okay. So let's move on to the pretty much only non-human villain, the Red Deaths. Um, you know, as okay, you know what? I started with Stoic. You can take this one.
Uh, there's not really a lot here to talk about it, I don't think. Like, you could say the Red Death's sole want or desire is to eat and be fed, so is that necessarily evil? No, but I don't think anyone was going to say that this dragon is good either. Because if all it wanted to do was eat, then I don't think it would eat other dragons. It's not necessary. That's not a necessity, a thing that it has
Yeah,
to do.
because I can ask my mom for dinner, and if she can't make it for me or she doesn't want to make it for me, I won't eat her. You know, there is villainy in here, but one could argue that's the way dragons work. I don't know.
I
Do you
mean,
think the Wildebeest does this as well
well,
on his off day?
eat other dragons.
Yeah.
I don't think Valka's Bewilderbeast did. Otherwise, she's kept a very big secret from us
Mhm.
that we probably
Oh,
should know
oh, he,
about.
oh, he kept a big secret from her.
Possible.
If Rise to the Edge is canon, then she raised it. Who knows? Maybe he went through a rebellious teen phase. Go figure.
Well, he grew out of it then, so he learned better. So you could still say not inherently evil.
Yeah. Fan
Um,
fiction writers, get on it. I want to read that. Anyway, you were saying?
um, you also have to take into account that the Red Death does possibly use some form of mind control over the dragons as well. So, you know, again, taking away the will of others, probably not necessarily a good guy thing to do.
Yeah, but then again, it's not necessarily if it's a good guy or not, it's the good guy of its own story. So, in his point of view,
Or
yeah, you know
hers.
what? Oh, hells, I don't know. It's, it's, in its point of view. Mm, you know what? No, I think it knows that it's not a good, maybe it's kind of in the middle because the things it does are not necessarily good things, but the motivation for it is also, I'm hungry. That's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say somewhere in the middle.
I, I don't think I will. I think I'll just go with, it knows what it wants and it'll use any way or means to get that. It knows it wants to eat and it'll do whatever it takes to eat. If it means eating other dragons, well, that's what it'll do. So,
Go bring me food, but sir or your majesty, wouldn't isn't that bad? I don't care. I'm hungry. Bring me food. And what
exactly.
happens if I won't? And what happens if I won't bring food? I'll eat you. Oh, okay. We'll go. We'll go.
Exactly.
That was the last conversation between the Red Deads and that Grunkle it ate when Hiccup and Astrid saw it before before that scene in the movie. Anyway, so that's the Red Deads. I'll let you take this one because you probably have a lot to say about this
Um,
next person.
why do I get to start tuning? Mildew. Uh, I I wouldn't say he's actually the good guy of his own story. What he wants is very much selfish at this point. He
Um,
he does, like, he'll make some good points, but those points are eventually corrected and rectified and fixed and no longer as much of a problem. Like when we first see Mildew, his entire points are the dragons are still causing issues. Even if they're not attacking us and destroying our homes and things of that nature, they're still being pests. They're still, what they're doing isn't exactly helpful to the village. It's more disrupting. It's more disturbing people. It's more disrupting them in their daily lives. But these are issues that are, eventually fixed by Hiccup and the rest of, and everyone kind of agrees that, oh, well, once these issues are fixed, the dragons are no longer pests and they're actually being quite useful. So, all right, it's a problem that's solved. And as we see more of Mildew, we see more and more that, again, his interests and his wants do center more around just getting back at Hiccup and Toothless and trying to get revenge on Hiccup and Toothless for ruining his plans in the past. It becomes less about getting the dragons off of Berk and more focused on just that. So I would say that he might have started off with good points, but his intentions were never good to anyone around him. So I wouldn't say he's the good guy of his own story. He might see himself as the good guy trying to get the dragons back off Berk, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is. And I wouldn't say that he is either.
um, I'll say that he may be the good guy of his own story at the beginning, like you said. But as soon as the series starts to progress, this is like, okay, no, this guy is just, you know, saying how every point he's trying to make pretty much gets fixed by Hiccup and everything, to the point that yeah, he does become, excuse me, pretty desperate, and also teaming up with Alvin and everything to Hamburg is kind of like, if he was the good guy of his own story, I think he himself even knows that he kind of went downhill at one point.
Mm,
And also, working for Drago, apparently that doesn't really give him any credit.
sure.
I won't forget that we
HC, your mic has died during the recording.
have a pretty long list. So next up is
You're gonna have to repeat what you just said because your mic just completely went out.
uh, okay. So,
You just
like I
went
said,
silent for a little bit.
oh, okay, weird. But I just said that Mildew is working for Drago, confirmed, and that. But before we get to Drago, we we it's time to talk about Alvin.
Mm-hmm.
And since you started the previous two, I'll start this one. Um, Considering that Alvin and Stoic used to be pals before the events of the show, I'll say that Alvin has some credit of being the good guy of his own story. At the same time, though, you may need to refresh my mind about him a bit because I don't really remember Alvin's motivations.
Um, his motivations when we first see him in Riders and Defenders of Berk are just destroy Berk, and then I want the Book of Dragons so I can train dragons to destroy Berk.
Hmm.
And eventually he becomes, well, Dagger betrayed me, so I want to get back at Dagger, so I'm helping you out, and once I help you out, well, we're not exactly enemies anymore. We're okay with one another.
So I'll say he is the good guy of his own story because at the end of the day, he does what's good for him, which you could argue is not necessarily a good quality to have to a hero, but yeah, I'll say he is the good guy of his own story mostly because the one thing that motivates him is his own well-being, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
I suppose if you look at it like that, like again, seeing yourself as the good guy doesn't necessarily mean you're the good guy, but
Oh no! It's not. And again, it's not the point of this discussion. Like
sure, sure,
we know that, like, with the exception of Stoic, most of the people, the names being brought up in this episode are bad guys.
sure,
No,
sure.
that's not the discussion. The discussion is if we look at the situation from their points of view, they may be seen as the good guys.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah.
So in that case, I'll say that yeah, Alvin is probably the good guy of his own story.
Um, I guess I could see it. I guess I could see, like, it would be interesting if we knew more of his past with Stoic and why he hated Stoic and Burke so much. Other than the fact that they're outcasts, like why was he outcasted specifically, and does it have something specific to do with Burke? And if so, then maybe him wanting to destroy Burke would make more sense. Maybe him wanting to get at Stoic and destroy Stoic and defeat Stoic would be more interesting, right? Like maybe there is some underlying cause there that would make us more sympathetic to Alvin at the very least, right? So, I mean, I
I
could
would
definitely
also
see it.
I would also love to know what he did with Simon and Theodore, but then I realized it's the wrong Alvin, so never mind. Hey, I put a lot of thought into that joke. It took me like a minute to think up. And if you think I'm horrible for using that joke, well, the writers of the show did it as well because the episode Elvin debuts in is a direct parody of the thing I just referenced. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, blame the writers, not me. Anyway, Dagger. Now, Dagger is an interesting case because if Race to the Edge wasn't a thing, I would say no. He's not the good guy of his own story because I think he himself enjoyed being a bad guy because again, I'm saying that take Race to the Edge out of the equation for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
When we first meet Dagger, we know that he became chief of the Berserkers because he murdered his own father. That's
Led to believe, but yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's what he
So
wants everyone to think and believe, yeah.
yeah, and that's how he introduces the events. So and again, Race to the Edge not happened when he was introduced. So we take it as true. We assume it's true. And the rest of his motivation after that is, to get Toothless's head because he wants to prove himself to his followers, I guess. So you could say that he's trying to kill Toothless in order to prove himself, and that kind of makes him a good guy in his own eyes. But then again, he also outright stated that he murdered his father. So, and Dagger the deranged. He is deranged. Deranged people don't really take morality into, don't really care about morality, I think. So, Riders and Defenders only? No, he's not. Race to the Edge, however, changes things up a little. Yeah, he starts off like he did in Riders and Defenders and everything, but when the second season rolls around and he turns on Vigo and Riker in order to save Heather, his sister, and then the entire thing with helping Hiccup and Toothless out and sacrificing himself and revealing that he didn't really kill his father, he just wanted people to think that. And then, helping Heather leading the Berserkers and eventually his relationship with Mala. Yeah, eventually, not only did he turn good, but he pretty much turned good because he knew that was the right thing for him to do.
I would
And
argue a little bit differently, but go ahead and finish first.
no, so I think that if we take Rest of the Edge into account, then yes, he is the good guy of his own story.
Fair enough. I would argue that he was actually a good guy from the very beginning. That he was the good guy of his own story from the very beginning.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because, yes, because taking into account Race to the Edge, his father disappeared. The Berserkers were without a leader whatsoever. Dagger stepped up to the plate and did everything that he did because he wanted the Berserkers to be seen as formidable still and as strong as they always have been, and as strong as they were feared to be and always have been.
Mm-hmm.
If he didn't do that, they could have been attacked because people probably would have seen them as weak without Oswald, their main leader, who everyone supposedly respected. And they could have been, and the tribe could have went into disarray as well. So Dagger stepping up was him taking on a responsibility that, whether he wanted it or not, he wanted to make sure the tribe stayed safe.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with his actions towards Hiccup and the others? No. Did he need to kill the Night Fury in order to keep his tribe safe? No, but killing the Night Fury definitely would have given him quite a bit of credibility and respect from many people within and without his tribe.
Mm-hmm.
So I would argue that he was always the good guy of his own story from the very beginning, because his entire purpose for doing what he did was to make the Berserkers look and seem as strong and formidable as they always were, even though their leader had disappeared.
Okay. So, yeah, okay. You know what? That's a good point. Yeah,
I
that's a good
definitely
point.
didn't think of that on the spot either.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, obviously. So yeah, good point. I might need to change my statement on that, but we overall agree. From his point of view, he's a good guy. So next up are Vigo and Riker. Seeing how they're brothers, I think we can talk about both of them at the same time. So the show went over it, we went over it. At the end of the day, they're businessmen. They are trading. They hunt dragons and sell them because that's their job. That's their way of making a living. So from their point of view, they are good guys, or at least they know what they're doing is wrong. But they have no other choice probably but to do it, which is why Vigo understands where Hiccup is coming from, and he's trying to actually make a deal with him back in Defenders of the Wing Part 1.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say they are, if we take into account their own story, we don't know much about where they came from, but I assume because they are brothers and they're working together, they do they do need to share that mindset that you know what we need to do this in order to survive in this world. And also the I think the reasons that each one I need to be reminded of that actually, but in the end of Race to the Edge season 4, when they both turn on one another, it's pretty much because
Riker pretty much, I would say Riker pretty much turns on Vigo because he thinks Vigo is obsessed with Hiccup and he thinks it's bad for the business.
yeah, exactly. That's the thing I want to say. Riker thinks that Vigo became that each one of them thinks that the other's mentality is bad for the business. So
I
you
don't
can
think
understand.
Vigo necessarily thought Riker's mentality was bad for the business, but when Riker tried to betray him, yeah, then he definitely thought Riker was bad for the business. But I think
Because
Riker's
also,
initial betrayal and, all of that was definitely, I think you've become obsessed. I think you're bad for the business. You need to be dealt with.
although again, it kind of plays to their own, you know, traits that Vigo's the brain, Riker's the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it just came to the point that Riker was also sick of Vigo playing the long game throughout this entire thing, or Vigo is annoyed with Riker's recklessness and how he wants to take action now. You can also see the argument coming about from this. But the point is, each one of them has a problems with each other because they need to run a business, and they don't think. Uh, Neither one thinks the other does a very good job at it after Hiccup and the other writers shows up.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So yeah, both of them again good guys of their own story. I actually would, kind of an outside thought about this. What do you think their parents were like with them? Did they ever talk about it?
No, they did never bring that up. um, I don't know.
I would imagine Riker would be like daddy's boy, and Vigor would be the mother's boy.
Possible. Could be the
Because
other way around.
yeah, no, because I'll tell you why. Because Vigo is the youngest of the two, right?
I have no idea.
I
I will
believe they
find
said.
out or see if it's actually been mentioned somewhere.
I think I think they said that Vigo is the younger of the two brothers. Well, until you look for that, I'll just say that people usually say that the older child is more related to the father, while the younger child is more related to the mother. That's like that's the basic belief. So I don't
Mm.
know. I can see it maybe.
Yeah, Riker is considered to be the older brother. Vigo is the younger.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, I think Riker specifically mentions that to Dagger when Dagger says when they were playing the uh during when they had to go and rescue Heather because she had been captured the first time, you
Hmm.
know, during that episode. During
Yeah.
season, I think that was 2, I think it
Yeah,
was.
rest of the edge too.
I think Riker mentions it to Dagger then when Dagger says, "Have you ever thought about just strangling the guy or just offing him or doing something with him?" And Riker
Yeah.
says, "I wouldn't do that to I think he mentioned somewhere along the lines in that area that I wouldn't do that to my younger brother, right? Like something not
Hmm.
quite word for word that, but he gives
Yeah,
off the sense that he is the older brother.
that's the scene I recall when I think about it. But the basic point is, yeah, both of them are the good guys on their own story, even when it comes to turning on one another. So, moving on to kind of a sequel to last week's episode, Johan.
Hmm.
This is an interesting one. What do you think?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't say so. I think that he's definitely the villain through and through. Because if you ask me, his goal is to just I'm using a lot. I think his goal is to just attain more money, is to just become richer than what he already is, and through whatever means he needs to do that, he'll accomplish that. And if he needs to lie, cheat, and steal, then that's what he'll do. If he needs to, get into bed with an absolute madman in order to gain a hold of something that could potentially make him richer than what he is, then that's what he'll do. So I wouldn't.
Could you care to repeat that last sentence?
If he decides to get into bed with an absolute madman to attain something that would make him richer, then he'll do what he needs to do.
Yeah, that sentence just gave Johan a whole new side, and I kind of want them to make that canon. However, um, but yeah, I can agree with you because again, his motivation. We talked about it last week as well. His motivation seems to be money, and just that pretty much. The only way I can maybe say he could be the good guy of his own story is that he came from a poor family, but then again, nothing really confirms that.
Yeah, it'd be hard to find that out.
Yeah, so you like I could say he came from a poor family based on how he dresses, but then again,
I mean,
we don't
he's a
know.
traveler, so.
Yeah, but then again, we don't know. We don't know if he's what his background is. We don't know how he heard of the King of Dragons or how he came across the hunters and everything. But the basic point is we don't know what his motivation is aside of money. And yeah, not only do these villains are usually the weakest kind of villains, it doesn't make them good guys in any way, shape, or form, unless you're Scrooge McDuck. But that would be interesting. Somebody give me a fan out of that. But outside of
Johann
that,
Scrooge McDuck.
yeah, with a cane, pogo jumping over dragons.
Scrooge McJohann.
Scrooge. Okay, fan
Johann
artists, get
McScrooge.
up. Yeah. Actually, you know what? All the fan artists we know, I'll probably ask Leffy for this, maybe. But fan artists, go make this happen. Um, so yeah, but basically, no, Johan is not a good guy of his own story. At least I think so.
Um, I could agree. Like, you could definitely. I suppose you could probably like go in and come up with a backstory to make him more sympathetic, or to make him more to try and give him a point to where you can see where he might be coming from more. But at the end of the day, from what we got, I would say that yeah, I don't think he is the good guy of his own story.
No. Okay, so next up on the list is Drago, and I did mention it in the script that we can add Krogan in here, but seeing how he's pretty much a glorified soldier for Drago, does it really matter at the end of the day? Do you think there's something to say about Krogan in this regard?
Um, you could argue that I think you could probably argue that Krogan, maybe he signed up with Drago from the very beginning, in which case I would say no, he's not the hero of his own story or the good guy of his own story. Although you could also argue that Krogan was, maybe he was a part of a village that Drago had conquered before, and so he had no choice but to work for him. So instead of being a lowly soldier who would probably die very quickly, he chose to, make sure that he wanted to live. So he chose to rise up in the ranks quickly and do as much as he possibly could to make sure he achieved that goal of continuing to live.
Actually,
Unfortunately for him, achieving that goal got him, Drago's got him to the point of being Drago's second hand, potentially, sure, but it also cost him in the fact that as his second hand, he failed. And the second he did fail,
mhm,
he was no longer useful.
yeah. Okay, this is something I haven't thought about it when I wrote the script for this, but for this paper I'm working on for school, I had to rewatch Triple Cost today, just to make sure I remember everything correctly. And when Vigo talks to Hiccup about, infiltrating Johann Krogan's base, he did say that that Krogan and Johann have a mysterious buyer from the north, which by now we know it's a Drago. And the reason they kind of decided to get rid of Vigo as soon as they could is because, according to what Vigo thinks, he they were afraid that if they would have been killed, Vigo would just take the deal with Drago. So in that case, I could see Krogan's motivation, but at the same time, again, like Johan, he's doing it for the money.
Mm-hmm.
So even if we say Krogan is a different category and he doesn't just falls under Drago, then no, he's not the hero of his own story. Because again, money.
I could see where you're coming from.
And again, I rewatched the episode today, so this is actually one thing I would love to say about for the show's credit, that it's one of those shows that you can have a blast watching it the first time, but then if you come back, you can actually pick up on a lot of small details that you may have missed.
Mm-hmm.
And I love shows and movies that do that. So good on the writers for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we can talk about Drago. This seems to be the biggest debate because out of all the villains, I think Drago is the one that people are most mixed about if he's a good villain or not. And I think again this is really a case of it kind of falls down on if you buy that he is the good guy of his own story or not. And to some extent, I'll say he is because he, according to him, in the second movie we never actually saw it, but he just talks about it. But according to him, he saw his entire family being killed by dragons, and that's why he decided to to pretty much make a dragon army.
I mean, we
But
definitely see for a fact that he's suffered loss from the dragons because he lost his left arm.
yeah, yeah, he lost his arm. Yeah, but again, there's a difference between being injured and and seeing your entire family and home being destroyed
Oh, I mean, I
by
bring that
them.
up to point out, like, I think we can take, again, believing what a villain says at face value, right? Probably a foolish thing to do, but I think we can say, based on his left arm and the fact that he shows that left arm while also talking about losing his entire tribe to the dragons as well, I
Oh
think we
yeah,
can take what he says at face value and say that, yeah, he's probably in that instance telling the truth. I don't think he has a
yeah.
reason to lie
No, no, no. I'm not saying
or
he's
want
lying.
to.
I'm just,
But yeah, I get what you're
yeah. I'm
saying anyway.
just okay. So in that sense, yeah, I can get how he sees himself as the good guy. But then again, if your main problem with dragons is that they killed your family, and to be to be honest, so going from I want to avenge my family to I want to rule the world is kind of a big shift, isn't it?
Well, I would say, yeah, sure. I think eventually his priorities shifted to taking over and ruling with an iron fist, right? But I think, at first, probably he wanted to just get back at the dragons, right, for the loss that he suffered. And he found like minded people who were willing to do the same. And he decided, in order to take out the dragons, I'll use the very same dragons to take out the dragons as well. Right? I'll use them against them, get them to fight against themselves. That way, I keep human losses down to a minimum. Right? Granted, that's
Mhm.
probably not exactly the way he sees it, I'm sure, but you know, you can argue it in that perspective. But also at the same time, he had people laugh at him and tell him, laugh at him and assume that he was a fool and a madman for thinking he could control the dragons and for trying to, thinking he could even wipe out all the dragons. So I think, eventually he decided and saw that his, what he would have to do, what, getting people to rally behind him to achieve what he wants to achieve, which is the destruction of all the dragons, he would have to take over them as well. There was no way they would rally behind him because they didn't want to be ruled over by someone else. Like Stoic and the rest of the chiefs that we saw in How to Train Your Dragon 2. They weren't going to bow down to someone else specifically. So he decided, well, if you won't bow down to me, I'll get rid of you and then I'll lead your people that way.
You know, we have things to go for to talk about when we discuss this, but unless Drago did suffocate from the Bewilderbeast, you know the story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good chance maybe How to Train Dragon 3 could expand on it and maybe change the perspective.
Absolutely.
Maybe. So we may have to go back to this one, but as of now, I'll say he is the good guy of his own story, but he's a good guy who kind of lost the way at one point.
Yeah, I could agree. I think, you could definitely look at it like that.
Okay, so the last one, and let's be honest, I kept him for last, not because he's the last one to show up, but because it's the funniest one. Let's talk about Calder.
Okay.
Can we agree the most pathetic of the villains?
So far, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll see another villain who is even more pathetic, but so far, yeah, I would say the least villain.
The least villain. I'll use that if you don't mind. But yeah, but Calder. You know what? Let me ask you this: what is his motivation?
I mean, we know he thinks he's a dragon, right? I think, from the way it seems, I think he just wants to rule.
Yeah,
It's
so
really hard to narrow down his motivation, right? Like, he brings them there to help them, but like, it's a hard one to narrow down.
Something. One, I actually thought that we need to redo the Serpent's Eye review we did a few, that was a year ago, right?
Getting there, I think so. Yeah, if not past.
Yeah. So I really think we should probably redo that review at one point, maybe after the entire thing died down. But that's a story for. Yeah, but that's a story for another day. But when I think about it, Calder and Drago kind of have the same motivation that they want to show supremacy over the dragons and rule them. Here's the thing, though. We just said that we can understand where Drago's coming from because dragons pretty much destroyed his life. But then when you get to Calder, it's like, so you want to be a dragon? Great, dude, but why? Like, what is it? Why do you want to be a dragon? Yeah, obviously, I would want to try and be a dragon at one point because I could fly and everything, but yeah, we don't really. It just says that he's a dragon. What? The more I think about it, the more it's like, man, what was this guy?
Looking back at it, right? Like, I have the Serpent's Hair in my hand real quick. There's you can look at this, Ryan. Like, change is the way of all things, and with change comes devastation. And with devastation, opportunity, growth, evolution. Those great dreaming dragons knew this. You could, I guess, argue in that sense that maybe he thinks he is the next step of evolution, that humans are not good, and that he's above all of them. So I guess you could argue from that point that he wants to be viewed as not necessarily a dragon, but something better than. And Hiccup's argument is that he'll never be anything more than just a man, because he can't sense because he can't sense the things that the dragons could. Like he uses the Forever Wings waking up, right, as you know his as his sign that he is something more, that he is the next step in evolution, that he is better, that he is the next step of change, that he is the better change, right? And Hiccup says, no, I don't think that's the case. That might just be because of their new alpha, right? Kind of referencing back to Toothless being crowned the new alpha. And he says, the dragons can sense these things, but you can't. You'll only ever be just a man. So I guess you could say his desire, his goal is to prove once and for all that he is the next step in the evolutionary chain in his mind. That he is, the change that the world needs. Maybe. I'm being
Okay, yeah.
terrible at
So
getting
in
that
that
point
case,
across. I need more time with that point.
no problem. But you know what? Let's go with your point for a second. Is he the good guy of his own story?
Based on
You know what?
that, I would probably say no. I guess it depends, right? On how you want to look at it and how he
Yeah,
wants to
you know what? You know
achieve
what?
that goal.
You know what? Here's my take on it. From his point of view, like in his own story, he's the good guy. The problem is that his own story sucks and it's stupid. So
A hard point to argue. Agreed. Especially considering he died to fire, so.
let's talk about this plan of yours. I think it's good, except it sucks. Pretty much called in one sentence. But so based on what you said, I need to reread the Serpent Cell at one point in order to make a full judgment. But Calder may be the good guy of his own story, but the point of the matter is, it's the only story you can look at as a good guy from.
Agreed.
Okay. Anything now that we've gone through all of the list? Anything else you want to add about, for the How to Train Dragon villains slash heroes in their own right?
I don't think so, no.
The one thing add I will add is that the new villain has
Grimmel.
some work to do. Yeah, Grimmel has some things to live up to and some things he needs to stay away from. Which means I hope he doesn't think he's a dragon as well. I hope.
I don't want another businessman either. We've had a few of those now, I feel. Between Vigo, Riker,
Yeah,
and maybe Johan half and half. If he's doing it for the money again, I'm going to be kind of tired.
and well, we'll have to wait and see about that. But anyway, that's all for this episode of the Berkcast. We hope you enjoyed. What do you, who of the villains we talked about is a hero from their own story in your point of view? Who is your inner hero, which I hope you won't follow because that means you will be a villain at one point. Whoever it is, let us know in the comment section or on Tumblr where we are known as Berkcast Team, on Twitter, where we are known as Berkcast with a capital B, capital C, and you can find all of us on the How to Train Dragon Discord and the Berk from Vine forums. So until next time, and until someone will give me that Johann Scrooge McDuck art, I was AC.
And I've been Wolf.
And we will talk to you all next time. Take care.
Bye bye.